You know what it is. Kank.
Ow.
Sorry. You know, we're getting old. The kanks start to add up after a while.
Kank, ink.
Kank. Guys, you ready for it? Well, hello. And guys, welcome back to Pencil to Pencil, your favorite. Oh, I like that. It's very majestic. Your weekly live stream creative live cast brought to you by 3 Count 'em 1 2 3 expert cartoonists. Pinch me, I must be dreaming. That's right, expert cartoonists. Let's do some introductions. I am your first host. My name is JAMAR NICHOLAS. Thank you, Steve. I am on the board of the National Cartoon Society and also the Philadelphia chapter chair. Beyond all those lovely things, I am also the creator of Leon the Extraordinary, a cool series at Scholastic. The next book in the series, Worst Friends Forever, is in stores now. Go pick it up, why don't you? I would be remiss if I did not introduce the Bill Bixby of webcomics, slowly walking down that lonely internet superhighway.
I thought you said he was trickling.
I didn't get to that yet. With a melodic piano tinkle.
Tinkling, that's... do you have to go tinkle?
I do now.
He is known in these internet streets as Stone Cold Steve Conley. What up, Steve Conley?
Gentlemen, so good to see you. My name is Steve Conley. I write and draw the webcomic The Middle Age. You can read it over on the Webtoons, on the Tapas, on the Go Comics, over on middleagecomic.com. I also make the TTRPG stuff. I write and draw the whole thing. It's beats a real job. Beats having a real job.
Beats digging ditches.
Beats flipping eggs. not that our audience is got frittata money.
I flip eggs. So.
The night is young.
But I would be a replicant if I did not introduce the Tower of Power, the Manny Hour, Too Sweet to Be Sour, the cartoonist who walks, the Kirby Crackle to our Snap and Pop, Mr. Mike Manley.
Hello, everyone. I am Mike Manley. I am a over 40-year, oh dear, 40-year veteran of comics, sitting right here in this chair for eons, drawing comics and storyboards, and gosh, it's like, what haven't I drawn by now?
Well, that's a good question. What haven't you drawn by now, Mike?
I was thinking the other day of all the different things that which will tie into what we're going to talk about tonight, but all the different things that I have drawn, subjects, things that I've drawn in my career. And many of them were never things that I ever thought that I would want to draw. You know what I mean? Like, oh, here's a job. I need a job. Draw this. No, I don't really want to draw it, but that's part of being a commercial artist, making your living,
Are you, is there something on your bucket list that's something you want to draw? You want to run on Conan. You want
I actually had a run on Conan the King. That was one of my first run, I think, was probably that.
Wow.
In the 80s. If I could have done something, I probably would have had a run on the FF or something. But if I couldn't really do it the way that I would want to do it, then it would end up being sort of frustrating. That's the other thing. Sometimes it's better to do a run on something like Darkhawk where there is no expectation. It's whatever, right? It's completely new. Because if I was going to do a run on FF, I'm always comparing myself or thinking of, Kirby's 102 issues. That's, that's what I would want to do. But I think the aesthetic of what I would want to do is not what they would want to do. So it would sort of end up being frustrating, which kind of is how Batman was. the Dark Knight stuff. It was great, Batman, but then it wasn't my Batman. The Batman that I thought that I would do, but that's the Batman that's where Batman was when I was offered it. So, because my Batman was the stuff that Adams and O'Neill and Jim Aparo, back when he was more almost like a combination between James Bond and Sherlock Holmes. Now he's just like some big roid dude, like, which I sort of got to do when I worked on the cartoon. The cartoon was more like, it like cherry picked of all the good stuff from Batman. So when I got to work on the cartoon, same with Superman. When I got to work on the cartoon, that's my favorite Superman, because it's like cherry picked all the good stuff. You got a little Fleischer stuff in there. You got a little Kirby stuff in there. You got a lot of good stuff in there. With the comics, it's also part one of 94, right? So maybe your luck is you get the Joker in that issue or you don't, so it's not, yeah. So back in the day, it would have been fun to do a run. I did get to do a little bit of that comics greatest world thing that Eric Larson did. He brought in a bunch of people like me, and I think Ron Friends and Bruce Timm and people years ago. And that was fun because it was sort of a retro. I got to really do sort of like a Kirby thing, Bruce inked my pages, so that was a lot of fun. So, but yeah, now and as you age, things that maybe you thought that you wanted to do maybe don't mean as much. Things change, so I'm not saying I wouldn't do a Fantastic Four thing now if something was offered to me and it was fun, but the whole business is so completely different that it actually probably behooves you really to do your own thing. It's that fun. It's like the kid playing with your favorite toy, right? But in reality, it's better that you do your own thing.
JAMAR, was there something that you wanted to try in the an IP or something from the Marvel or DC canon that you wanted to ever tackle?
I still would like to do a Spider-Man thing, and I feel like there's been so many shots at Spider-Man at this point that kind of things that I would see in my head that I would really like to do. Someone has done it or come close to doing it already. You know what I mean? So, but this is kind of silly, but one of my favorite Spider-Man things was when Pete Baggs did a Spider-Man issue. And it's the most unhinged thing ever. It's very
the megalomaniacal Spider-Man, right?
Yeah, so I'm laughing already. But and I always like those kind of I don't want to call it indie because that's not really the word. Like one of my favorite anthologies was the Bizarro anthology that DC that had Dave Cooper did a Wonder Woman story in it, and it was just really, really fun. Wasn't that where Kyle Baker did the microwave baby story? That's where that was. Letitia Lerner, Superman's babysitter. I don't know how I remember that. That's fantastic. But like that's the kind of comics that I would like to do in the mainstream. And I don't know when there's another Bizarro coming up. But I kind of scratched that itch when I did that Marvel Super Stories thing, the Hulk last year.
That's great.
But yeah, that's a good question. What about you, Steve?
I don't know. I got to do a little bit with DC. I've never done anything for Marvel, so I mean, I feel like again, we probably touch on the topic we're going to talk tonight about is that working on something for Marvel or DC, depending on the profile of the book and the popularity of the character, opens up doors and opportunities at different conventions and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
There are things like suddenly, hey, if you're the artist on this particular book, you can get a table at this convention. That, you know, and coming from a cheapskate's perspective, like conventions, I decide based on what it costs me to go to. And so when I drew Star Trek for IDW, again, I love the IP, but it was a thing where suddenly I could get a free table at a convention.
Mm-hmm.
And that mattered. And I think being able to add Marvel to that list of people I worked, at least wrote for. I've got a Captain America story I'd love to tell, but you know, I don't think, you know, I think they're good on writers.
Are they lousy with writers?
You're lousy with writers.
Well, you know, the thing is that back in the day, you had annuals, so you could get a backup story, or you could get an annual where it would be an odd thing. They don't really do that now, so that's one of the other things that's hard about. It's very different about the business, because when I started, and most of the guys of my generation and people a little bit older, when you started, they'd go, oh, okay, we kind of like this kid's stuff. We'll rummage around. We'll give you a Sergeant Rock backup, or a Spider-Man backup, or you know, a Captain America, an annual, an Avengers annual. You get to draw a 8, 10, 12 page story, but those don't really exist. So you don't have what you don't have is you don't have the training wheels, because those were the things where you could show an editor, okay, here's my samples that I brought in. Right. We don't know how long it took you. You could say it took you, 3 weeks, but now here's the live tryout. We're throwing you in the deep end of the pool. Let's see how you do. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
So you don't really have that. And then what you don't have connected to that is I talked about this the other day on my Facebook. What you don't have is the editorial staff, which when I started directly went back to guys who started working in the golden age. Right. So you had people who had a historical knowledge and had worked with like the greatest people in the business. So when you showed your work and they gave you feedback, they had a historical knowledge of the business, which you benefited from when someone like, Archie Goodwin would give you a critique.
Right. I think I might have told this little story before. I haven't done a lot of work for DC Comics, but it was an annual. It was an Aquaman annual, and I wrote an Aquaman short story, and it was taking place in an unusual time. It was after Larson's run, and Rick Veitch was just picking up the series. I think he was my in, and someone said, "Hey, let's have Conley write something." And it was just a short story, and I pitched a couple of ideas, and one of them was like, okay, during all this tumult inside the DC universe, what's up with Black Manta? And I pitched that to DC about it's a story of Aquaman and Black Manta. Maybe it's from the perspective of Black Manta. Mm. And the editor was like, "Who is that?" I'm like, I don't know. I'm my knowledge of the DC universe probably begins and ends with Super Friends and maybe some Neil Adams comics. So I only knew I knew 2 things about Aquaman, maybe. But that editor had no idea who that was. I'm like, okay.
That happened with the 30th anniversary of Darkhawk. The young editor, basically asked me, "So what's cool about Darkhawk?" Because he'd heard of it, but he'd never read Darkhawk. So I'm working with an editor who did not have an institutional or editorial knowledge of the character.
Wow.
Right. So I can't sit down and it's like you have to read it. It would be like saying, well, what's cool about Sherlock Holmes, this old guy with like a weird hat, and what does he do? It's like he looks at stuff.
What's up with this hat?
Yeah,
he's got a hat that goes forward and backwards. What's up with that?
Can we lose the pipe?
Yeah.
I mean, is he like Sherlock Bones? Because I read those.
Is that the dog detective?
The dog detective, like, yeah. You know? And so, I mean, I really, for me, I think that is one of the simply the biggest differences, and the thing that actually hurts the industry a lot is that the once very dense editorial knowledge has dissipated, and there's a lot of information online, but it's not vetted, right? It's not vetted by people who've been working for generations, right? So you can go see some information and it's slick and it's presented in an entertaining way, but it doesn't mean that somebody said some comment the other day about, if you want to see realism, something about like, look at Will Eisner, and it's like, Will Eisner is not realistic,
right?
You know, he's not. You know, Alex Raymond is realistic, or Hal Foster is realistic, right? But Eisner is a stylist like Kubert or Kirby or whatever. You know,
they're confusing genre with style, right? Because his stuff was more grounded. His stuff was generally more grounded, generally more less fantastical.
Yeah, but it was still fantastical. I mean, the way that drew raindrops and mood and everything. I mean, he was a cartoonist. I mean,
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, you know. So I think even the terminology now is kind of, I think, is very sort of sloppy, because people throw around terms like realism, cartoony, but I don't think that there's it's not like they've done a master's course on the history of cartooning, you know.
This is interesting because our buddy in the chat, Dom, what up, Dom? Dom says the least a new editor can do is watch a comic story and video about whatever character they need to know about. And I channeled my dear, very black mother who would say, that's too much like right. Meaning they're never going to do that.
No. I mean, I think one of the other things is that the editorial staffs are smaller. They put out a lot of books, so each person is more like a traffic manager and less like an editor in the old classic sense of the editor, because they, you know, you don't have, like, when I was working regularly at Marvel, you had group editor, and then you had an editor, and you had assistant editors, right? So each editor had an assistant, right? And then you had a bullpen, and then you had, you know, so there was a pretty deep staff at Marvel and DC, and I was more familiar with Marvel than DC. But then they also had a deep production staff, right? Well, those don't exist anymore. You don't have an art director. You don't have people in a bullpen, right? And a lot of the institutional knowledge that would happen in that kind of a situation doesn't exist, because you don't have people that have been doing it for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, all working in the same place, right? So a young person can teach an old person something about a computer or about some modern technique, right? Or a modern sense of design. And then you have an older person, somebody like John Romita, who can draw everybody's pants off and tell you a lot about storytelling, about layout, right? About communication, visual communication. Well, what you don't have is you don't get that mix now. You don't have that on a daily, and you know, you always have new people coming in. They're bringing their influence, and that influence is mixing with the historical. And comics has always been lousy with that. Especially since Marvel blew up and they had the Midnight Massacre, where they fired everybody. And same with DC now. They don't have an art director. You know, Mark Chiarello's gone. So, you know, sometimes you need that experience eyeball to look at something and go, that works.
This is interesting that I didn't think we were going to go down this road, but I mean, there's obviously when we talk with generations of comic artists as we do, and knowing that, especially the time like when I guess I'll call the bullpen era of comics, where things had a flow to it, and there was, and I'll say this with quotes, a professionalism that probably doesn't exist in the same way today. And there was a way of getting things done and out the door back then. I'm always afraid to think, and this is like a lot of our conversations are about kind of what the history of cartooning and comics has been. And we don't really focus too much on what's happening right now. But I think the lens kind of always focuses that everything's crap now. And that's not necessarily true, because we all talk about things that we really enjoy that's modern or current. But I wonder if the people that are kind of shining now, are they throwbacks to the old system? Like we talk about Chris Samney and how great he is. And he's like a new guy, so to speak.
Yeah, he's an old guy now.
Right. But so, like, is he good? And I don't mean to talk about people in public like this, but is he good because he's kind of like a throwback to the old stuff? Or somebody like Trad Moore, who has like this really just like insane style, which is very fresh. Nobody else draws like Trad Moore. Is that not as good as something else? And I think this is leaning into the 3 C's as we get closer to it.
I see stuff all the time that is interesting stylistically, but I think fails in certain aspects of the formal aspects, I should say, of the craft. That it could communicate better, right? It would be clearer, right? Because you can pull style off the top. Right? Like you can draw square fingers or round fingers or pointy fingers, or you can do little dits like Mobius, or you can have lineless style. There's all these different styles, but the thing is comics is communicating a story. Anything that weakens the communication of the story to the reader is not good. And so the formal aspects I'm talking about are irrespective of style, right? If you're drawing something in a manga style, or you're drawing something in a woodblock style, your job is to communicate a narrative. Anything when I would teach the class, I would say anything. It's like you're weaving a spell, right? When you pick up a comic book, right? You pick up a comic book. This is a big comic book. Comic book, right? Yeah, you're looking at its drawings. But there's a magical thing that happens if everything is working right away. You stop thinking of it as a drawing. You fall into the magic spell of these characters. You don't think, I am reading a word balloon, I am reading words in a word balloon, right? It's a magic spell. But the minute something, you kind of fall out of it. You don't have a smooth experience. A really good comic, it's just like a great song. You just get in the groove, right? It's like a great film. And all these things are constructs. A song is a construct of these different beats, rhythms, different instruments, all organized, right? So a comic is the same thing. If you do everything right, when you're reading Charlie Brown, you think of him in the same way that you think of the Hulk, or
100%.
Right. So, but if you don't do something right, it's just not as satisfying. We've all had that experience where you're watching a film and you're going along, and then you're like, what the hell was that? That sucks. And then you never really recover, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that that's why I'm very big on history, because you can learn what other people have done, other people who built, one day when a guy did a comic, he decided to put panel borders, and he decided to do the writing and do a little balloon shape and have the little tail going to, the person who did it before maybe didn't do that. He put all the writing underneath, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's all these different formal aspects of eye flow, page flow, all these things that if you benefit from having someone with experience help you make your work flow better.
Right.
Irregardless of whether you're drawing like, a manga guy or some whoever the hot freshness is right now.
Right.
When you're reading a comic book, there's a way of doing it that works, and a million ways of doing it that don't work. Right?
And having the ability to explain how it doesn't work and how you might make it work. That's a huge thing, because like you're describing, these are almost like these are fundamentals. And if you don't have these basics,
it's grammar. It's just like grammar. If you're going to write a story,
100%,
right? There's grammar. If you don't understand grammar, then it's really hard for you to write a story, right? Yeah. People are not. It's not going to work.
Right. It's foundational. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like an artistic thing that everybody goes, fuck grammar. I don't need grammar. I'm going to be the one person who never uses any grammar, and everybody's going to read it, and you'll see, you'll rule the day. You grammar police.
You'll be the one escaping.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, does this dovetail into the main topic? Are we getting ahead of ourselves, or should we lay the groundwork for the C's?
Yeah, I think we'll talk about the C's.
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah.
So I'm going to share this, and the only reason I'm sharing this is because it was a public conversation. Let me pull this up. Public conversation.
Put him on the gay grid.
Oh, let me make sure I have it here. All right, so this is kind of the genesis of what's going on right now in Facebook. And the names aren't important, but the question this cat asks is, why does it seem so hard for a lot of mainstream pencilers to maintain a monthly deadline on their books? And the world explodes from this question. And Ryan Otley from Invincible fame kind of started this discussion. And he says, it seems many are falling into doing the 3 C's: covers, conventions, and commissions. It's a fine idea, but it isn't comics. Comics are the comic, the property, the book. It is the hardest part. It does lock you down and take most of your time. But if you have a great book with a great writer, it could be your retirement that keeps on paying you. Unlike the hustle of the 3 C's, you can't live off of past covers, commissions, and conventions you've done. And all of comicdom has an opinion on this, and it's been going on for like 2 or 3 days, like hundreds of comments from just a lot of comic creators. And this is kind of what we wanted to get into today, kind of like, where does all this land? I think there might be camps that get caught up in this conversation.
There are always camps.
Yeah, there's a lot of camps.
There was the Comics Broke Me camp. Remember that? That was what.
There are some people have a cannon loaded with their argument, and they're just waiting for any movement on the horizon. They're going to fire whatever they were going to say. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah. So maybe, and even to this, and just to kind of maybe preface this, every couple of months there's a new scuttlebutt, right? So there's Comics Broke Me. There's Publishers Paid Me. There was, I forget, there was another one in between there somewhere. And, it was when somebody shared their, like, advance breakdown for a book. And people
for the graphic novel.
Right? Yeah, and people like, wait. Right. Yeah. People are like, wait, what? Mm-hmm. So, and all of these are, every time these things come up, it's kind of pushing against, I think, the mysticism of what we do for a living. Right? So you kind of have a fan question and a pro answer, and then the question marks start popping up. Well, this doesn't match what I thought in my head was happening, and then there's a lot of discussion of unraveling this and kind of like the reality of it. We can kind of end the episode early and just say, just put your ass in the chair and draw. But we have another hour and change to go. So maybe like we could just start there. So the 3 C's, covers, commissions, and conventions, seems to be a column that is being set up in this conversation, that instead of doing interiors, which take a really long time, some sort of hustle is to do covers. Like that's easier or something like that. And this, if I have something to stand on, I'm going to try to balance these two. And I want to kind of see what everybody else has to say before I kind of put my stamp on it. But so the idea is that no one gets famous off of covers, and you get your name by doing interiors. And
name all the top cover people in comics today.
They're already comic book dudes.
Well, all right. Probably the most, I would say that to me, there's like 2 guys that are probably 3 guys that stand out. Everybody would know. Ross, Alex Ross, Frank Cho, and Art Adams. All right. Now, Alex Ross is probably the king of all that, right? But Alex Ross made his mark doing, Kingdom Come and Marvels, right? So by the time he became a cover artist, he was already in demand. People knew that people liked his stuff, right? Same with Art Adams, right? He's been doing covers forever. Mike Mignola used to do a lot of covers back in the 90s. And most of the guys who do covers, who became famous for covers, Michael Golden, people like that, were guys who were popular with fans, didn't do they didn't do like 12 issues in a row like John Romita Jr., right? There's guys, or John Byrne, right? Their work was a little bit slower, a little bit more special. So they did covers as a result of the fact that their work was popular, right? And because their work was popular, the editor would put a guy like that on the cover, would get him to draw a Quasar cover, or a Spider-Man cover, or a book that was not doing so hot. Well, let's put a popular artist on the cover, because the idea was in the old days, in the 90s, that if you put that on, because people, what do they order out of the catalog? They see that cover. What do they see on the stand? They see that cover. It was all based upon that first impact of seeing the cover, right? Young people now today think, I want to do the cover, right? Well, who are you? What have you done? Where's your have you made your bones, so to speak? Like all the guys I'm talking about made their bones. So by the time they became cover artists, premier cover artists, they had established their status, so that the publisher goes, I want Frank Frazetta on this cover, right? That's how Frazetta built his thing, right? That's the old model. I think that the young people now think, I want to do the cover because the cover's cool, right? I could just blow my wad on the cover, right? And drawing comic books, even drawing. I said this on my Facebook. Somebody was criticizing something, and I said, even a shitty comic book, the shittiest comic book you could go out and pick up today, is a lot of effort. Like if it's 22 pages, every panel is fucked up. It took that person, usually the person who sucks, has to work harder, right? They have to work harder, and they're not as good, which is why the stuff is like not as good. So it's not like they're like, oh, I really suck. Oh, 1 page done. Oh, I'm sucking, and like another page done. No, the person who is not as good actually struggles harder than the person who is good. It's because even if you're good, you have to work hard, but it's not like, oh, like every hand, every, what angle do I show? Oh, I got to draw a car, I got to draw a city. I think that's the other thing that appeals about the cover, just the figures, people standing. Most of the covers you see today are just figures with some element of like a little city or something or whatever. Everybody's voguing.
There's a lot of this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
They're not the what I would call the classic storytelling. So it's a lot easier to sit down and draw a cover of Wolverine and the X-Men all posing, right? You see like a million versions of that. Now draw a cover that's got a Gothic castle in the background, or something a little, or like all those great old war comics where those guys would draw like a P-51 Mustang shooting a tank, real hardcore drawing of real things, so that's why I know that's why it appeals to young people, because it's an easier lift. 2 or 3 days, 4 days, even a week, you're done. If you're drawing a comic book, you're spending a couple weeks. You can spend a couple weeks, 12 hours a day, 10 hours a day, a couple of weeks. And you gotta stay hard the whole time, man. You gotta be you gotta get over those days where it's like, oh, here's a part of the story that's not fun.
So I want to try to keep this inside the rails somehow. I don't know how it's going to happen because there's so many interesting tentacles coming off of this. JRD, what up, JRD? JRD says the industry seems, and this is a very modern thing right now, the industry seems to think variants will keep it afloat. At least that's the impression it presents.
It is. Now, we're going to have Joe Murray on, next week or week after?
Next week.
But one of the things that's keeping the comic book industry, which is dying, the direct market is dying. Diamond is going out of business, right? So it's not healthy. And one of the things that keeps it going is doing all these alternative covers, because they figure, oh, people are going to get this issue of Spider-Man and there's 5 covers, so we've sold 5 times as many copies of Spider-Man because everybody's got to buy all these covers. But that they went through that in the 90s. They were multiple covers and the foil covers and this cover, and there's like landfills full of that stuff. Nobody wants those comics now.
Hey, don't you take my Gen 13 covers.
It's the same. Comics is sort of like, I should say, the direct market.
Thank you. That's a big clarification.
Right. That they're stuck repeating the same mistakes because the people who buy and the people who sell comics, that's where they are at. Right.
It's interesting. And one of the things that's most interesting about comic books is that they are one of the few storytelling mediums that comes out in collectibles. Right. It's as if we were telling stories on Franklin Mint plates or something like that. They have to arrive in pristine condition. They can charge a premium for every single one of them. And that webcomics aside, trad publishing aside.
That's deep.
But it's interesting because part of it, I've heard a lot of, looking through the conversation that people have been having about this, a lot of it is like, well, this is what the market wants. Mm-hmm. And so if it's all market demand, and the market's changed, I don't know how you solve that problem if everybody who's buying comics now wants 5 covers.
But does everybody want 5 covers?
Well, I don't know. But if the notion, because if we come back to if people are saying that that's one of the reasons that the market demands this in some way, but if we can remove that as a thing, that they're just guessing, they're hoping that they're just trying to bump their numbers and get by one more quarter. But getting to the point of the with covers, commissions, and conventions, this kind of also went into a conversation about style, right? And that was like one of the first things we asked in chat was that complex illustration style versus classic, maybe at a time when comics weren't necessarily a collectible market and they maybe had a younger audience, right? Comics at one point had a younger, what's that?
Broader audience. When comics were on newsstand,
right,
you had a much broader audience. I mean, you had Richie Rich and Sad Sack, and you had all those comics for kids that the direct market completely does not want.
And every spine was horizontally creased because people were fishing through the stacks with their books.
Yeah. You know, I mean, up until the mid 90s, the 7-Eleven right up from here, you could go get comics. But when Borders went, Walden's, all those bookstores went, the newsstand went away, right? And so the newsstand up until at least the early 90s, you know, you still had Richie Rich and you still had all that stuff. But those general, like comics was a big thing, was a much broader before the direct market, right? When the direct market came in, it increasingly narrowed year by year. And then when everybody got greedy in the 90s and they thought that they were going to make $1 million because they were going to buy the Return of Superman, it blew the tires out of the business. All those other comics went away, which is sort of ironic because there's an audience for kids that are the audience that are buying Jamar's book. Millions of kids that are still going through Scholastic, going to libraries, but the direct market, most of the stores in the direct market do not want to support that stuff. So what they do is they're trying to tread water. If one of the things is, well, I can put out a new Batman #1 and I can get 5 covers out of it, then we increase the sales of that first issue, right, and the second issue to fight the second issue slump. But in the long run, you're not really bringing more readers in. All you're doing is you're going to cannibalize, right? Because if somebody's going to buy 5 issues of Spider-Man, that's 4 issues of some other comic that they're not buying.
And a comic retailer can let those 10 regular covers compost because they're going to make the money back through the one they eBay, right? Mm-hmm. We see Chris Eliopoulos there. Had a question that we starred. I think it might be a good time to enter that if that's okay, Jamar.
Yeah, go for it.
Talking about the art styles, it's also what we expect in art these days. Paying $5 a book, readers want to see every button on a costume, every tread in a boot, etc. Kirby had a shorthand and could pencil a book in a week. Is the idea that a Kirby wouldn't make it today?
I don't think so.
I mean, we can't. Is that blasphemy? Did I just blaspheme?
No. I mean, I think that there are people who like simpler styles, right? There are books that have simpler styles. There are books that have more rendered styles. But I think that the part of the argument comes down to, I think, effort versus page rate. The real problem is that comics sell so low and page rates have been frozen since the 90s, right? Like I got a big bump in my page rate at DC. So let's say I make $300 a page to pencil in 1994. If I'm making $300 to pencil a page in 2025, I'm taking a major fucking hit because inflation has gone up a lot. I'm sure I'm probably making $100 at least less a page, right? And in fact, I figured that out one day. I figured out what my old DC page rate was. Commiserate, like what is $1 in 1994 versus $1 in 2025, right? And I would have to be making like $600 a page, right? What I can buy with the same, I would have to be making $600 a page, and nobody's going to get $600 a page, and no comic sells well enough.
So the page rate's gone down compared to eggs, and
right.
And
pay me in eggs.
And the amount of detail has gone up. The requirement that the sophistication required by, it seems to be the thought that the sophistication required by the majority, or at least a sizable portion of the audience of the direct market.
That's a choice. Again, that's an editorial choice, because there are people like John Romita Jr. who don't draw a billion little lines, and people like his stuff. So right. I think that's not the only argument. I think that in general, there are fans. Look, there's fans who like Barry Smith's stuff on Conan, and he put way more lines on Conan until Alfredo Alcala came along and inked John Buscema and put a bajillion. It looked like a woodblock print, right?
100%.
Right, and people love that, right? And it starts with the origin. It all starts with the desire of the artist. Some artists like mention Chris Samney. He has a very sort of Kniff-based, Toth-based, older, simpler, less is more style, let's say, right? Which is very difficult, right? Because when you got to draw a guy's head with 4 lines, each one of those lines has got a lot of lift. It's got to do a lot, right? But that's his choice. That's what he was interested in. It wasn't like the editor at Marvel said, "No, man, get rid of 4 of those lines on that face," right?
Yeah. I feel like in that case, that's often when the artist finds their voice, and that's kind of a different. You take the fundamentals that you discussed at the beginning, and you take a person being genuine to themselves and kind of perfecting that version of themselves. I think he's one of the ones who does that. Eisner, JAMAR Nicholas. People who find their voice and do that supremely well. I feel like that's how a Mignola can survive during the 90s, where
you see Mike's style. I've known Mike from almost the beginning of his career, and you look at the progress of his work, right?
I had those Alpha Flight issues.
Right. So if you look at his voice. He perfected his voice and then continued to perfect it, because the beginning of Hellboy doesn't look like Hellboy now.
Right.
So you're not going to do that in 5 issues.
Or 5 covers.
Right, and you're not going to do that in 5 covers. You're going to do that in 300 pages, 400 pages. You're going to do that in 12 issues a year. I mean, part of that you cannot escape. You cannot escape having to produce a volume of work. And the problem is, many of the publishers don't pay a high enough page rate, and the people don't, part of it is also the environment. So when I worked at Marvel or I worked at DC, the requirement was, if I wanted to do a monthly book for them, I have to produce X amount of work, or they get somebody else.
Right.
That's it. It's not my choice. Right. So I believe it was Al Milgrom telling Brett Blevins in the beginning, you can be like a Michael Golden or a Kevin Nowlan, who's not a monthly person, or you can be a person who does monthly comics, right? You get to sort of decide what works for you. Some people can be John Byrne and sit down and draw 3 pages a day. Some people, like Michael Golden, is not going to draw 3 pages a day because of the way his brain works and the level that he's putting into it. There's people that are, so I think it's sort of like illustrators versus storytellers. I'm not saying the other people are not telling stories, but what they're really into is the illustration. Like Wrightson was an illustrator. Neil Adams was an illustrator. And they have a very illustrative approach, which takes more time. You're going to shoot photo reference. You're going to bring a lot more detail on a page. Some people have the storytelling, and that's what's important. Like Kirby was a storyteller, and the way he developed his style was that the inker could embellish it. If you put Synod on it, it looked a certain way. If you put Chick Stone on it, it looked a certain way. If you put Vinnie Coletta on it, it looked a certain way. But the delivery of the story was always the same. The building of the story, the pacing, the acting, right? All that was the same. The finish could vary, right? But all the most important things were very consistent. So, and that was a conscious choice on his part, because there are Kirby comics in the 50s that were much more naturalistically, and he could draw a real hand if he wanted to. He was stylizing that stuff on purpose, right? Because he was a storyteller. The same with Buscema, right? He developed that whole way of being able to do that looser shakedown style, just lay out the books, because his value to the company was telling a story, taking a script, a plot,
right,
and telling a story, right? So, I think sometimes people get a little bit lost in the weeds. I do think that that there is a certain element or percentage of the modern fan who likes detail, because detail means it's not cartoony and it's real.
That look real.
There's an intensity to it, right? Because you draw, the Buccaneer boot versus the boot from
the military.
You're drawing every, like the guy who came up, who was it that started drawing Captain America with every chainmail?
Yeah, the plates and everything.
Right.
That was Steve Conley who did that.
Right.
I think John Cassaday did a.
Well, it's Kevin McGuire, I think, that did it first, right?
Did he?
Was it him that did it first? That drew the big. Now Kirby drew it as a design, some little sea things on him, right? And we just accepted that he had the shirt that was supposed to be chainmail, or when Neil Adams.
We didn't know. It was just a cool pattern,
right. And then when Neil Adams drew it, right, when he did those Avengers issues, he still drew the little. Now he drew much more realistic anatomy, but he still drew the little things.
The cankanks.
The cankanks, right? So the scallops. But everybody accepted that, right? People didn't question it. So you have somebody who comes along and does the actually drawing all the little things, right? But which is fine. But those guys can't do monthly comics, right? And even Neil Adams had trouble doing monthly comics, because he would only do like a couple issues. He did a shit ton of covers, right? But him drawing interiors was what he did. The X-Men, he did some Batman. He did not do a lot of long runs on stuff. He did a few long runs and a ton of covers, and his covers were very illustrative, right? But again, at that time, you had to be able to produce, because if you couldn't produce, they would just get somebody else.
Mm.
They would just get somebody else. So I think part of it is that young people who don't have the historical knowledge of what I'm talking about get confused, or their argument. I understand the argument of not making enough money. That's the basics, right? It's like how much money do you get per page, and how many pages can you produce a day?
When you say young people, where are they falling in this argument? Because if comics are mostly an audience of, if comic books, spinner rack, direct market, if that's mostly an older audience, I'm not sure where because my sense is that
older audience of buyers.
Yeah, the people who buy comics, who buy the variants, who are looking for every link in the chainmail.
People my age don't draw monthly comics. People of my generation, you look at Marvel and DC, there's almost, the only guy I can think of is John Romita Jr. That's the only guy I can think of. There might be a couple other people, but
It's like Andy Kubert, maybe.
Does he even do those guys even do monthly comics? I mean, maybe they do, but I'm saying you're talking like what, 5 people, maybe? The majority of the young people drawing monthly comics are south of 40.
That's what I want. I guess that's what I wanted to clarify. If 39 was the young people, then I just needed to know that in my head because sometimes the argument often comes across as like people who have, you know, they're 18 or they're just going into art school, and that's sometimes the audience we're talking to. And I just want to be clear about what demographic we're talking about.
I don't think there's any 18-year. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think there's any 18-year-olds drawing comics for Marvel and DC. There are 18-year-olds drawing comics, but I'm talking about the people that are drawing monthly comics. You always had a fresh. I was one of them. Fresh, you know, waves of people coming in their early 20s. But basically now, from what I see, and I don't go to the comic book store, so I just see stuff on the web. Right? I see a lot of stuff. So I think I have a fairly good idea of stuff between all the various social media feeds. There are a few young people, but most of the people of my generation are not drawing anything for Marvel or DC. Outside of, like I said, the only guy I think of that's like in there every month is John, right? The only guy I think of that's in there every month. I don't even think, you know, Jerry doesn't do it anymore. Dan Jurgens doesn't do it anymore. A lot of those guys write stuff, but they don't draw stuff. John Byrne doesn't do stuff. You know, most of those guys don't do stuff. So there's another generation of people. Like Chris Samney is old now compared to those guys, right? He's probably 15 years younger than me. I imagine he's in his mid 40s to 50, somewhere in there. All right. But the people that are younger, the 25-year-olds, not that many are probably working for Marvel and DC. They're probably doing their own thing. They're probably, you know, it's, you know, the business is very different that way. You know, when I came in, I got coached by people like Dick Giordano, right? So somebody coming in now is not going to get coached by a Dick Giordano because a Dick Giordano is now working at Marvel or DC. Maybe Jim would be, you know, Jim Lee would be that, but I don't know how, you know, he's not in the bullpen saying, "Hey kid, you know," it's just not the same thing. So I do think there are demarcations. There's a lot of young people doing comics, but I think a lot of them are also doing web comics.
But we're also talking about the consumer, the customer, right? In this conversation.
Well, I think the customer, from what I can see, the direct market customer has got to be at least in their mid 40s, and I base that upon the people who are my fans, right? Who are at least in their 40s, like my podiatrist. You know, he's a young guy, read my stuff as a kid. He's in his late 30s now. And so he was like a little kid, right? Like 7 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's always that youth thing. People are obsessed with the youth thing. But I think in comics, there are not a lot of 18-year-olds reading Marvel comics. There just isn't.
Yeah, totally agree.
Go ahead, Steve.
No.
So I wanted to kind of get back to that.
That's the covers, right? That was the sea of the covers.
Yeah, well, I want to go back to like the root of all this. And this dude's question again is, why does it seem so hard? See, this is kind of like just from a fan's perspective. I don't see what the problem is that you guys can't do these. Here you go, Chris. They're playing Rivals. My cousins play Rivals like it's their job. And there's like characters that they've never heard of. I've never heard of Jeff the Shark before Rivals, but okay. So why does it seem so hard for a lot of mainstream pencilers to maintain a monthly deadline on their books? So you see, it's like A plus B equals C with somebody who goes into the shop and is like, well, what do you mean it's late? Why is it not here?
You don't have to.
So okay, well that's a whole other thing. But I wanted to go back to Chris Eliopoulos had a nice little follow up that he said when we talked about every button on a costume. He also says, "I will say my point about detail is that readers expect more, so artists take longer to get a book done, miss deadlines, etc. So they tend to make less than if they went off and did covers, commissions, and conventions."
Well, I also think that there was a penalty. I had a penalty if I was late. First thing they would do is I couldn't ink my work. Second thing, they would get a fill-in. Third thing, you wouldn't get regular work. So it's like an environment, right? An animal adapts based upon the environment. When I was drawing up into the, mid 90s, when I stopped doing regular monthly comics and went to animation, but I still have done stuff since then. But when I started, if you were late and you got a reputation of being late, then you would not do a monthly book, right?
Right.
And if you wanted to do the monthly book, then even the guys drawing the X-Men, if you're doing a monthly book, you have to produce the material. And they always had a lot of trouble on those books of people beating deadlines, right? So there's a very narrow amount of small number of people who can screw the pooch, but are popular enough that they can still get work.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of those people have aged out now, and they are no longer doing monthly books, right? Everybody who could stop doing monthly book, whether it's J. Scott Campbell or you pick your favorite person, they all stopped doing monthly books. Even Mike Mignola stopped doing monthly books. Like I said, the only guy I can think of still doing monthly books was JR, because he honed his skill and his style for production. And that was a conscious choice based upon the environment that he grew up in. So right. And so if you're a young person, that environment is completely different than my environment. Right? It just doesn't exist, except for the fact that if you can't produce the work, they'll get somebody else to produce the work.
I think there's also another contributing factor, Mike. When you were drawing Darkhawk, if you finished a book, you finished issue 1 of Darkhawk, and you had a page of that art to sell, how much could you have gotten for it that day?
Well, I don't know, because I kept all my stuff. I sold very little.
At some point,
I know there are guys like Adam Hughes and people like that who would supposedly pre-sell stuff. Like, I'm doing this issue of whatever. It'll be,
that does seem to be a factor in it, and but partly is, I think there's a lot of factors going on. One, people had seen Kirby's style and that kind of cleaner aesthetic, that faster, the Ditkos, the totes, and at some point, the taste, as the audience got older, the taste tends to get a little more, biggest air quotes possible, sophisticated. Right. I feel like as you get older, suddenly the Filmation animation style doesn't quite hold up as much. But when you're a real young kid, it's Citizen Kane. But so you're getting older, the tastes are getting more sophisticated, and at the same time, the original art is selling for a lot more. It becomes more. I could see why they start putting every rivet in. I could see how that could be a thing where it wasn't an editor necessarily saying, "Show me every rivet," as much as artists showing off and creating beautiful pieces of collectibles, basically creating a piece of art to sell, not a comic page.
That was Image. That's the whole thing with Image. You're making an image that people want to buy, right? And so their whole thing was really not about storytelling. It was about making a cool image, right? And so the aesthetic in the 90s changed from storytelling to making a cool image. Every page had to have a cool image because then I can sell it.
Right. So another incentive to however long that takes, because suddenly, especially if the page rates aren't increasing, but the value of original art is, suddenly that original art matters a lot more than your page rate.
No, and those guys also left a lot of money on the table because once the books were returnable, right?
Yep.
Okay, so there's a lot of different books were not returnable when I started. That didn't happen. You know, they would do a reprint or whatever. You know, so a lot of, again, the environment changes. So when the environment changes, it allows artists to adapt to that environment. So someone who is 20, 23 today works in a completely different environment than I did, because all this modern, you know, there was no internet, there was none of this other stuff, right? So you made your living by drawing pages and turning them in and getting another script and drawing pages and turning that in. You didn't get royalties, you know. I mean, I did get the first royalty I get, big royalty, I was on that issue of the Transformers, because that book sold like a bajillion copies, right? That's the other thing. All the books suck now as far as sales go. So again, even with the 5 covers and the 37 foil and all that, people are not making royalties because the books are selling most below 50,000 copies. And like I said on my post the other day, when I started, 75,000 copies, they would cancel a book. When a book got down towards 100,000, right? Now, if you sold 100,000 copies of a book, hallelujah.
Right.
You know, happy days are here again.
Thank the maker.
Right. I mean, most books sell below 30,000 copies from what I understand. Right. So again, 30,000 copies. And if I can bump it by 10 because I do 5 covers, right?
Right.
And then don't retailers also have to sell a certain amount to get some of the order, a certain amount to get the
those like pre-order what do you call it, incentives.
Right. So
you order
again,
10 copies, you get the 11th copy, and it's a sketch cover or whatever.
Right. So again, they're only doing that because they're trying to squeeze more money, as much money as they can. What they are not doing with that is they're not getting more readers. They're not growing more readers. All you're doing is cannibalizing. If I'm going to buy all the 57 issues of this new X-Men thing, and there's, 4 extra covers for each one, well then, you're an adult, because kids don't spend $5 a comic, right? They're not. They're going to spend that money on a Starbucks, right? So then it's an adult, and at a certain point, from what I hear, adults go, I can't buy $500 worth of comic books in a month to get all that stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, they're hoping that they don't lose that much money so that they can then make their money back on a reprint, the collections of the stuff later. So it's like the formula is you do 4 issues, 5 issues, 6 issues, you collect it. The first issue sells, second issue, you don't know what your numbers are really until your 4th issue. So you hope that your sales don't plummet to the point that you have to cancel the book before you can collect it.
Right.
Dom says the kid is going to spend it on a Spider-Man skin in Fortnite.
Exactly. I mean, so a lot of the people that were my contemporaries, because they are not getting regular monthly work, they are doing commissions and conventions. They're doing like the Chitlin circuit or whatever. They're like I know guys who do conventions who do 3 conventions a month.
Sure.
And commissions. And I do commissions, but I don't really do conventions. And I do commissions because I have a fan base, the same fan base who's been buying my stuff since they were kids, are adults now, and they can afford to pay. You know, you can see my rates on my Facebook, and I try to make stuff affordable, so it's worth my time to do it. But I'm not trying to necessarily gouge people. I want to be compensated for what I do, but I don't want to do a lot of conventions unless I couldn't find another. First of all, the strips keep me too busy, but the idea of having to like fly, you got your airfare. Are they paying my airfare? Are they putting me up in a hotel? Are they taking me back and forth, or do I got to do all that stuff? But they're just giving me a $300 table,
right?
And then I got to bust my ass harder at the convention than I do at home.
Don't you want to schlep, Mike?
Right.
Come
Yeah.
on.
Well, hold on a second. Now, there's also a part of this that I think is kind of like not being said in this 3 C's, besmirching, is that normal schmucks do the circuit too. You know, it's not like all the monthly guys, you don't see them at New York Comic Con. Everybody's there. Everybody's doing the same exact thing. And this is what I was waiting to say, is that I think maybe the secret of all of this is that everybody that's in this business is working as hard as they can to make ends meet.
Right.
So even for the cover people, and I know a bunch of cover people, and I might have a couple of them on soon, is that it's not, I guess, you know, this is a grass is greener thing, and we've been doing this since the beginning of time. You look over the fence and go, oh, look, he's got a sprinkler that's automatic. You know what I mean? Like, everybody thinks somebody's got it better than them across the street. So, but say you're doing these covers, but you might have to do 6 of them in a month. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think there's this leisurely pace where you just get the la la la, and everybody else's job is harder than yours.
Well,
that's what this comes down to. Whose job is harder?
Well, I don't even look at it that way. I look at it as I need to make a living. And what do you define as a living? What I define as a living is going to be different than somebody who's 20 years old. What I need to make a month, right?
Sure.
Because it's all about, if you're drawing comic books, whether you're drawing a cover, you're going to conventions, you're doing a combination of everything, it's all like either you're making your living as an artist, or you're making your living partially doing something else, and art is on the side, right? And I think one of the things that gets missed is where you are on the timeline of your life, and what financial return you need for your effort. And people are really scared to talk about page rates, right? People don't like to talk about money, right? So if I say in the 90s my page rate was $300, lucky to be able to get $300 a page now.
Someone wasn't going around last year that a particular publisher was going to offer $200 all in.
Right.
Right.
Right. Now, a guy like me, because I am a triathlete, because of how I trained myself in my personality and what I aspired to, right? I wanted to be a Gil Kane or a John Buscema. I wanted to be one of those guys that was on the stands every month. I wanted to be Neil Adams. I wanted to be Frazetta or Mobius. I wanted to be like my heroes. That was everything. That's all I wanted, right? And I wanted to make a living, but I figured if you're good, that's just part of being good, is people will hire you. Because that was my dream, and I worked at it, I could still draw a monthly book. I could still draw 3 pages a day. Right? Now, given that 3 pages a day, you got to make some concessions.
Yeah.
Again, and it's all a trade-off. So if I'm getting $200 a page, I've got to produce that page faster. Right? And now it used to be the standard when I started is you had to be able to produce at least a page and a half a day. If not, you would not be fast enough to be able to produce a monthly comic. Right? Now, and I started at $75 a page. And $75 a page, I think I figured it out, was like well over $200 worth of in today's money. All right. So you bought more, you know, in 1984 with $75. You know, you go to Wawa, you buy a hoagie and a Coke. It's $75, right? So I understand the economics that young people face because of all of the smaller companies, they ain't going to pay you $500 a page. If they're paying anybody $500, they're paying the top most popular cover guy. Like we'll get Alex Ross. We'll blow our wad on Alex Ross to get a cover by him to put in previews, hoping that people who are completists of Alex Ross will buy that comic. What I've never really seen over time is whether that actually really pays off or not. Does it pay off? What percentage of your sales are people that go, oh, I got to have that Alex Ross cover. So even though I don't like this comic or I'm not going to be a regular reader, oh, it's got an Alex Ross cover or a Frank Cho cover.
I don't want to derail derail that bit, but I am a huge fan of that. I did that with my comics back in the day. The Steranko cover, the Drew Struzan cover, the Hildebrands cover, Kelly Freeze. Those covers are like, I was like, I'm going to spend money. I can either spend it on ads or I can spend it on art. And right. I spent it on art and it worked better than an ad. So I make the case that hiring Mike Manley to do your as a variant cover for you pays off better than running another ad.
Well, I agree.
Giving Mike more money is a good idea, is what I'm saying.
Right. But I mean, I think it really comes down to, in the end, with all this stuff, it's like, how do the economics work for you, right? If you live in Cleveland, Ohio, or you live in the Midwest, your overhead is lower, maybe $200 a page works for you. If you live in New York City, where your rent is like $5,000 a month or $3,500 a month instead of like $1,500 a month, it changes everything. And so it's personal, right? There are some things that are universal, but in the end, I think it's personal. It's what you wanted to do, what you desire to do, and then your personal economics, right? When I was 23, I could make less money, work longer hours, and it was worth it to me to try to achieve my goals to get where I wanted to be as a cartoonist. At 63, I can still work long hours, but you know, there's some stuff that I will do for free because I like it or I enjoy it. But if I'm working for the major companies, if I'm not getting, if they're not giving me something that's just like floating my boat, then I don't want to do it.
That's a super interesting point too, because as veteran cartoonists, as people get older, their expenses tend to go up. You know, the number of MRIs you need increases exponentially, and So you can't take gigs that pay less. And so comics is kind of forced, you know, a lot of veteran artists.
It's a dead check, right? Like Batman, when I did Batman at exactly the right time to do Batman. Not right before it and not right after. Right with that, with the whole Batman 500 and the Breaking the Back. And I made a lot of money. I made like $250,000 in royalties off of that one issue, right? Every issue after that, we're entering the atmosphere, right? Just going down and down and down and down.
Was there a moment where you had the thought, this is going to go on forever?
No,
Okay.
I knew right away. Like I made $15,000 in one day signing comics for QVC, which I thought was incredibly stupid. But if they're going to pay me $15,000, I'll write my name a whole bunch of stuff.
Uh-huh.
It was never going to be worth anything because things are only worth something if there's few of them. If everybody has it in their trailer and they got a Quonset hut full of comics, all the same one, it's not going to be.
I'm looking at my box from over here, Mike. Don't tell me that.
So those years, that 1 year was the best year in comics that I would ever have. And I knew that at the time.
That's
right. And I knew, and that's why in 1996, when I had the opportunity to go into work in animation, I left monthly comics because I could see the wheels were coming off every month. And it wasn't that long, like right after I did that, that's when the thing happened at Marvel and they fired all the editors. And again, for me, when they fired all the people I worked with, my history with the company was erased.
Right.
I want to ask about this topic brought up a lot of what seems like systemic problems with comic books. Next week we are going to be talking with Joe Murray. Is there something that comics can do? Comic books. Again, I feel like, Jamar is sitting up on Mount Olympus looking down on this conversation. Is there something comic books can do? Maybe apart from bringing, investing in QVC again, is there something that comic books can do to right the ship, to put the wheels back on? Mixing metaphors.
I think that Scholastic proves that they are already done it. Scholastic proves that you can get lots of young kids to read comics because kids like comics. Despite all the video games and all the other stuff, there's these young adult publishers that are putting out comics that lots of kids read. They can't get enough of Dogman, right? There's a lot of these books that are doing really, really well. The problem is the major direct market publishers are owned by major corporations who have no interest in publishing, no interest in spending the time and the money, right? Because in order to build up the audience, they will make a Captain America film that'll make $1 billion. They will make a Captain America comic that maybe, if you're lucky, you'll sell 50,000 copies, right? Like nothing. That's like a drop in the bucket. Disney could cancel all the Marvel comics tomorrow and not lose one night's sleep because they are only keeping the publishing thing going as a loss leader to generate ideas that maybe somehow down the road. You would have to spend millions of dollars to build an audience or to try to build a way to build an audience, and nobody is going to spend that kind of money in a corporation and go, I'm going to risk my career trying to revitalize that. They missed the boat on a lot of things. They missed the boat on manga. They missed the boat on the Turtles. They missed a boat on a lot of stuff because they were not interested in it. That's not what they want to do.
But comic books, not looking at the traditional publishers and not looking at like Scholastic, for instance, but comic books, which seems to be where the conversation was. No one was asking, why can't Raina finish a book? It was asking about like spinner rack stuff. Is that format, that collectible format? Is there a way to keep that going apart from what we're doing now and just continue to spin our wheels?
Personally, I don't think so. I think that the format, I think you could do graphic novels, but the direct market doesn't want to support graphic novels. The direct market is stitched to the pamphlet. The direct market reader wants the pamphlet. They want the floppy.
It's got to fit in a slab and a bag.
Right? They're doing, well, again, another one of those fucking boondoggle things. Everybody's slabbing everything, right? All these little things that try to keep pumping the air in the tent. I don't think there's a way, honestly. I mean, I wish there was, but I don't think there's a way of saving it without being willing to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars. And I think what they're doing at places like Scholastic is already working. They're already in the schools. They're already right there with the kids. They're in all the libraries. The kids know that now. You're not, the idea that you're going to get a 8-year-old to spend $5 to get a Batman comic that you can read in 10 minutes, it's just...
Well, that's also the other thing, is that there's no ladder falling down to kids in this market. And I feel like the older fan is gatekeeping in the wrong direction in a lot of ways. And a lot of retailers, and we could talk to Joe about this, and Joe's a unicorn in this, because his shop in Delaware is really kid friendly, because he sees he sees the future of who's going to come in here and spend money. But a lot of people feel like they don't want the kid part in their hobby. So there's not really a hand reaching down to pull the hobby back up.
Yeah, I mean, you would have to look. There really are no more newsstands. Borders is gone. Barnes and Nobles is not doing great. So where are people going to buy comics? Where would people go in to buy a comic? A 7-Eleven, a CVS, a supermarket. That's where I bought comics as a kid, right? You would say, "Oh, here's a comic. Hey, Mom, will you buy this?" Right? Well, are kids going to go in there and go, "Hey, Mom, will you spend $8 on this Batman comic?" Fuck no. I mean, it's just,
that was the mom talking. That wasn't Mike.
They're not going to do that. I don't think there's anything wrong with the characters. I don't think there's anything wrong with the format. The medium of comics, but I think pamphlet is a flawed thing that is wedded to the direct market, and I don't think there's any way to save the direct market without someone literally saying, "I'm going to be willing to spend $20 million to try to bring this thing back, and I'm going to make kiosks and put kiosks in malls." Oh, wait a minute. People don't fucking go to malls anymore because they're buying everything on Amazon. Right? Comixology, all these other platforms have had a hard time. So, I mean, I love comics, right? So I'm not saying this because I'm trying to be doom and gloom on purpose.
No, I don't think you're coming off that way.
Right. I just don't see there being a way of fixing this. All they're trying to do is to keep it from, there's a critical mass at a certain point at which they can't publish. Look what's happening to Dark Horse. Look what's happening to IDW. Look what's happening to all these companies, right? If the market could be healthier, these investment bankers who are buying these comics, they're buying the comics for the IP. They're not. They know. They're bringing back heavy metal. They're trying to bring stuff back. But when I bought heavy metal, I bought it in the drugstore. All right, what dudes are going to go in and get their fucking corn dog or their Slim Jim and hey, look, a robot with tits. I'll buy that right next to my Easy Rider magazine, right? Well, that's not happening because I can go right up to 7-Eleven and I can get the Easy Rider, but there ain't no heavy metal.
Before we burned through this episode, which was fantastic, and thank you for all of the eyeballs that are watching this. Steve, do you want to try to hit these questions? Well, these starred comments before we get out of here.
Yeah, there were so many great comments, and some of them we tackled. We try to weave them into the episode. Someone just came up on the screen briefly, so rewatch this episode, especially the part where I say give Mike more money. But I'm just going to go in order here. These might seem a little stream of consciousness after the fact, but here we go. Dom Gomez on the YouTube. The only reason I draw pinups sometimes is to grow my audience. Interior work never gets much love online, and that's
an interesting point.
That's a good point.
It's a really good point. Fan art and pinup art is a big way to get likes and increase your exposure.
And because of where we are with images, right? And I notice that if I put a page on Instagram, you gotta okay. If I just do a cool drawing of the thing, people like that. It's simpler, right?
Yeah,
it's
sure.
simpler. The people who love storytelling and the craft of the page and everything, that is a subsection of comic fandom and comic artists.
And talking about surviving as an artist, if you put a pinup up there in a pen and ink piece, you will get, and it's good, you will get an offer for it.
And it should be a woman, because the one thing that is still the most popular, no matter what people say, is women. Women like cute, sexy women, and men like cute, sexy women. I mean, you look at Instagram, I mean, half the images have got to be of women. Half of what goes by, if not more, in my feed are either some internet hoochie dancing, right? Or somebody doing like a pinup. And there's a lot of female artists doing, sexy, cute girls. You don't see a lot of women drawing the Hulk.
All right.
Let's get to Roy's questions.
Yeah, next question. Juan Albaran, hello, on YouTube, says, talking about the conversation was talking about how people like complexity, how the audience likes complexity, but making the case that there were others out there who are working in what might be considered a more classic style. I think it was a point where well made. I just wanted to, I'm glad we started. I just want to bring it up one more time. And not a lot of these are questions, Mike's and Jamar. So, but thank you for that comment, Juan. Dom again on the YouTube. Manga often uses 3D backgrounds, which I think Juan actually maybe pointed out, maybe doesn't, but not, or doesn't always, or doesn't often, but less work, but looks incredibly detailed. Is it more bang for your buck, or are you cheated? And about the audience's appetite for that sort of thing.
Well, I think, and we kind of touched on this already, I think in American monthly comics, there's, we've already talked about people who get off on like trying to catch somebody with their pants down with swipes and all that kind of stuff. And there seemed to be like that SketchUp research, that surge that happened earlier. And then, did you draw it out of your brain, or did you trace this from someplace? So the kind of thing that you can do in manga, where even with some of the manga screen tones that make an actual city that you could put in there and people will accept it. I don't think the American comic book fan wants to accept that kind of artwork that easily.
Yeah,
that's how I feel.
Yeah, and I mean, we had Juan on, and I mean, the manga market is a whole other beast where you have teams of people, one main artist and 2 or 3 assistants to be able to produce the volume of work. They got to do 40, 50 pages at a time, right? So if you think you're working hard drawing 22 pages or 20 pages, Marvel comic, turn out where like zip-a-tone on everything, detailed backgrounds, cars, cities. I mean, they don't skip, and they have a very different approach, idea, and clientele who doesn't have the particular fetish that the American comic book fan has.
And based on the publication schedule, occasionally you have to do some watercolor paintings, or some pages are just full on watercolor. Yeah.
I mean, there are other systems that the people are doing very well. If those things sell very well, the people become very wealthy. Their team does very well. They even have teams of people that just do backgrounds. There's professional assistants. I mean, you don't really have that here. You don't. I mean, I have assistants, but usually the trajectory is that you're an assistant, and then you get good enough to do like your own thing, right? So.
We got a question from Bill O'Donnell on the YouTube. At the same time, do folks like Webtoon pay the creators if they get above X thousand clicks per issue?
That's a Steve question.
And I can say, yeah, they do. They do. It is a revenue share system. It's based on the number of exposures of your comic. If your comic has a single episode and it is viewed 10 times, it's not going to add up. You're not going to get much. They will pay. I'd say it's pizza money, based on my 321 episodes and the next number of views they get. The more episodes I post that are new, the more fresh eyes I get, the more people discover it. So it does pay off to work more frequently, but it does pay. It does pay, and there is also the original sections of Webtoons, which Tom Zoller was part of, and that is more of you are commissioned to make a comic for them, and they have serious deadlines. There's those are no joke.
And but I mean, are we talking like 2,000, 3,000, or you're making $50 a month? I mean,
50. Like I said, pizza money. Based on if I do 4 episodes a month for me, I'm not the fastest guy in the world. I'm telling my story at my pace and weaving all my other projects in around it, my game books and stuff like that. But I'm doing my 4 episodes. It's about $50 a month. It's just one more place I put my comic, and that's just a place where telling people about my Patreon and telling people about, because it's ad revenue share, which is, has been dead for a very long time. The idea that it makes any money at all is a testament to how many people read it. So this comic has 22,000 subscribers there, and a lot of people read it, but a lot of people also get I said before, a free fire hose of content. And so there's not much reason to pay for it when you have basically have a free subscription to almost infinite comics.
Everybody loves free.
And it's a good price point for young people.
Right. So again, like you could go on Webtoons and just like be on there forever, right?
Or get 22 pages for $5.
Right. And not get the whole story.
And then have this collectible you have to I gotta put it someplace special because it'll increase in value or not. And there's coins and there's like essentially their in-house tipping system. They have that. So readers can give you but also from the very beginning, Webtoons has been very good about, here's a big prominent link to your Patreon to send people their way. Again, I think the audience is very young. It's very international. Maybe it's not the type of audience you'd want to ask for money. The younger the audience, you don't want to sully it with.
You're saying that they're not tech bros driving Porsches?
Oh no, that's mostly my audience, but still, it's classless, Mike. I'm not going to do that. And our last comment from Dom on the YouTube. Thank you, Dom. You are our
MVP tonight. Yeah.
MVP. Can you stand out just penciling when other people are penciling and inking themselves digitally?
Sure. I think so.
But that's kind of like a cart horse question, isn't it? It's like, are you talking about just finishing a project or being known as a penciler? Right? It's kind of like you're doing one to get to the place where people are inking you, right?
Well,
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of guys that are just pencilers, usually most people prefer to be able to ink their stuff, but there's I don't think JR ever really inked a lot of his stuff, and so he teamed up with really great inkers who are able to plus add something, right? So again, like depending upon the volume or your personality, what you're interested in, I would think that if you could lay out something, maybe have a really cool approach, and then you can get somebody who's really good at inking, I think you can make it You can make it as a penciler. I mean, again, it's like, how do the economics break down for you? That's the only way you can really figure it out. These people are offering me, $50 a page. Okay. I live at home with my mom. My overhead is low. $50 a page will work for me because I have very low overhead. This is a good opportunity for me. I'll take it. I'm 45 years old. I have a kid going to college. $50 a page doesn't work for me because I work an 8-hour job. So this is only going to be my side piece. Do I do it because this is fulfilling a dream? It's like there's so many variables, know. I have drawn stuff for free because I liked it, because I liked it.
Yeah.
100%.
100%. I figure my rate, like I said, here's how much I want to make every year. I divide that by 365. And that's how much money I have to make every day. If I take a day off, I got to make it another day.
That's pizza math right there.
my day rate, which I figured out a long time ago. If I can make $300 a day, right? $300 a day, and I generally work 6 or 7 days a week, right?
Yeah, that's six figures.
Right. So I can make a living, right? If I can't make $300 a day, okay, maybe some days you don't make 300. I mean, I do 2 newspaper strips. If one newspaper strip paid twice, I'd only do 1.
Right.
All right. So it's economics, it's and everybody's economics is going to be different. I will say this in closing. People will remember your work because of you telling a story. The comic artists we tend to remember are not the people that are just cover artists. The people that we tend to remember in the business long term are people who did long arcs or important arcs on important characters. Because there's a lot of great artists that are sort of forgotten now because they didn't do the issue where Supergirl got killed, right? There's people like Bob Osner, who is a fantastic artist, worked for decades, one of the best draftsmen ever in the business, but he never worked on anything that people collect now, right? And maybe some people might remember him for Angel and the Ape, things like that, but you got to pretty much be my age, right? There was a lot of people in comics that what they were interested in doing or what they were good at might have been humor. Well, people don't really collect old humor comics. DC's not putting out, Marvel's not putting out collections of Binky, or collecting, all
my sad sack books, Mike.
Right.
What about my Bob Hope Adventures book?
Exactly, right? And so there are a lot of people who were very good, but because they were not on an arc of, that's where Gwen Stacy died or whatever, right? So I think your best hope as a cartoonist for prosperity and people remembering your work long term is doing a lot of stories, because they fall in love with your story, they fall in love with your character. I mean, people read Judge Parker, right? They've been reading it since 1953.
Yeah. Right?
If you started it today, it wouldn't go. You wouldn't get readers, right?
No.
There's not enough, right? But even though it's been dwindling, you still have that core that's going down, right? So I think if you want to make your living as a cartoonist and a storyteller, you tell stories, whether it's a webcomic or I am imagining, 20 years from now, there will be people that are nostalgic for this era of webtoons, because it usually seems to be what happens in 20 years. People go like, "Oh yeah, I remember that."
100%. 100%.
I remember that thing. The issue might be is that if you're not good at archiving your work and saving it, in 20 years, you won't have a copy of it.
Yeah.
100%.
That's awesome.
That's so great. So do you guys feel like we turned this rock over?
I don't know. Do people think we turned the rock over?
Yeah, what does the chat think? Do you think that we kind of got to the bottom of the issue? It's always really interesting to watch when these kind of things happen. All of the kind of, I'll say, name people show up to kind of defend their position, because it's all very personal. And like I already talked about that whole other side of the fence thing, because I think everybody feels like they're being tread upon in some way or another. We're not doing that, Jared. but you know what I mean? And like I said, at the end of the day, like I know, especially for us people who are cartoonists or strictly illustrators who kind of feel like the writers, like this is still the writers' era in comics, where the writers get their name on stuff and they kind of forgot to leave the artist's name off of the book again. How that happened? And there's
that was on purpose.
Well, there's always that thing about the writers have it easy, and I'll also say, because I like to be the balance guy, is that, but also a writer is probably writing 3 or 4 or 5 books at the same time. You know what I mean? So I feel like everybody's job is hard, pause, in some sort of way. You know what I mean? So I think just if we think about it in a balanced way, like everybody's trying to just put food on the table. So
right, yeah, and like I said, the environment is always changing, right? I think we think that the creative environment is stagnant, but it's probably changing more now on a daily basis than it has ever changed for any group of creative people ever in the history of creative people in a mass medium, right? It's constantly changing.
Yeah.
And so I think the number one advice I give young people is that you have to be flexible and willing to change and bend with it and take that opportunity. It's not always going to be fair. It's not always going to be equitable, but the world has never been fair or equitable. And you have to look at it like short term, long term, short term, middle term, long term. Short term, you need to get work. You need to get work so people see your work and people think of you as a professional. Then once you get that, then you can start making some decisions like, well, maybe I don't want to work for $50 a page, or now I don't have to work for $50 a page.
Right.
Now I've got some opportunity because I did this other thing, right? Preparation, meeting opportunity is what people call luck, right? So I think and again, some guy living in the Midwest is going to have a very different overhead than a guy living in New York or Los Angeles, or somebody living in Africa or somebody living in South America.
Or Florida.
Right, or Florida, right?
That's why I moved here. I wanted to have more flexibility.
Right. So
more alligators.
Yes, and
I do think we've covered it. I feel like we're not going to solve it because it's clearly people have different takes on what makes a good comic.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't feel like we're going to unbuckle Captain America's boots.
Yeah, and this was great, and I love that we had a very lively chat. Thank you all for the chat. It's always superstars up in the chat adding their 2 cents. Thank you so much. So I think with that, let's start wrapping it up. I think we did our due diligence tonight and entertained you guys, and nobody came to blows, which is great. There's no punches.
Well, let me ask this question maybe on the way out.
Yeah.
If it came down to the fact that the direct market shrunk to the point that people were not able to make their living from print, who were able to make their living from going to conventions, would that be satisfactory enough for people? In other words, I would be drawing, you draw commissions and do remarks or whatever the other stuff, because it's sort of like movie stars, people that were TV stars on a show in like 1964, and now they're on the con circuit, you know what I mean? And they've got 8x10s that I literally think that will eventually be even a bigger percentage of, and there's so many conventions. I mean, it's just like, it's an insane amount of conventions out there. Like every weekend there's conventions all over the United States. I got friends that are doing them. So it's like, would you be satisfied as a creator to just go to conventions and sell your whatever your Kickstarter or your would that be satisfactory, or does it have to be in print?
That's interesting.
I'm not sure if I follow. Well, I think in order to sell the thing, it has to be in print, right? If you want to go to conventions, you probably want to have merchandise, or just want to go there and do commissions and do essentially perform or pre-sale commissions. And I feel like whatever would keep me from having to go back to being a short order cook, I'll do. I think if going to conventions, I mean, I've never been much of a direct market guy. My first series were all distributed via Diamond. I love comic shops. I love comic books as things to read, not really as collectibles. But if comic conventions are a fantastic place for me to make money. So I go there, and that's great. But I don't know if it doesn't seem like I don't know, because the direct market doesn't impact me as much as it does other people. I don't need an exit strategy. Is that getting where you're going, Mike?
Well, yeah. I mean, because it seems like it is fairly likely that we will get to if the air keeps going out of the tent, right? With the direct market, that you will have more and more people who are making a fairly substantial percentage of their income from doing shows. And I know a lot of young artists, that's what they do. They do the shows and they sell prints and stuff like that because they're not getting the work from the publishers.
Right. Because that's really the other side of that whole, that's Artist Alley, is the people who've never been in that. They're not leaving the direct market. They're never in it. I don't know. I feel like that's a whole other conversation about like, what does the future look like if there's no Batman and and X-Men comics? If Marvel and DC pull out entirely, can Image sustain everything? Will suddenly comic retailers just be back issues? Will they suddenly fill the shelves with Leon? What does that future look like?
What about you, Jamar? Would you? I mean, you're sort of.
I'm sort of hybrid already, right? So I mean, there's a piece for me where I don't do as many conventions as I used to, and one is not that I don't have to or I don't want to. It's that my focus is in libraries and schools and things like that, and going to a con is probably because I was invited, or there's some sort of connection there, or maybe I'm debuting something, or I'm there on the publisher's dime, like when I was in New York in October signing at the Scholastic booth. Like I was there on business, and then I dipped. You know what I mean? I wasn't there for 4 days. So I mean,
whatever the kids do now.
Damn.
You dapped.
So I mean, just to say is like, I think there's you have to have a market mix, but I don't know. It's such a up in the air question, right? And I think the modes change around, almost like those sliding puzzles with the little piece missing, where you have to keep moving things around. Like it's always moving. It's always moving. Wow. I couldn't come into this and say, you know what, I'm not doing cons anymore because that's not necessarily true. Or I can't just do ALA and BEA and all those alphabet soup library things, because you need to be in all of the pots at the same time. I don't know if that was a good answer for your question, but it's something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that the direct market really lasts only as long as there's a distributor to distribute the big two or big three, because and there's the real question about all the small fry, and how they're going to get through. So my question is, I suppose, is if Diamond couldn't make it work, how are the other companies going to make it work? What are they going to be able to do that Diamond couldn't do? Right? And so if you're an independent person doing your comic, because let's say, your personality is not cut out to work with other people, only work for yourself.
Sure.
Right? How are these other distributors going to be able to do something better than what Diamond was able to do?
Right, because everybody had said some sort of like bad thing to say about Diamond, just on a situational level. Everybody has like, Diamond, right? So, but what's the next step? Who's going to do it? Be a better Diamond, if that's even a thing.
Because in the beginning, when they were distributing the Marvel stuff, the books are coming in all crunked, right? They were getting bent up, and people were like, "Well, I don't want to buy this issue of Spider-Man because he's like,
when Penguin Random House started distributing,
they didn't know how to ship them, right?
Yeah, so I think that to me, it's all sort of attached, right? Like you can work for a small publisher. What do they offer you? Maybe they don't offer you a lot of page rate, but they offer you creativity. They offer you an opportunity. You can work for a bigger publisher, and maybe, like Mike Hawthorne is a great example of that. A guy who started out indie, worked at the majors, that lifted his profile, and now he's back doing his own thing.
Having that brand, having that, I hate that term, but being known among your readers, having a readership that will follow you to your next project is the most important thing, above everything else. People who will care about the next thing you do, because if the system falls apart, the only thing you'll have left is starting over someplace else, and you want those people to be there with you. Or when you go to a convention, what's that?
Right. Well, that ties into my point of like producing a volume of work, which gains.
Yeah, but however that form takes, whether it's doing a daily comic strip like Liberty Meadows, or whether it's, doing a web comic or a scholastic graphic novel series, I don't know. Let's pick one at random. Leon.
Right. Well, I think this will be a good place to stop, because the chat is talking about part 2. Was it Leonard part 6 in the chat? Like, we're not doing 90 of these, but I think a nice follow-up, a nice I keep forgetting, what are the things that keep you a bookmark? Not a bookmark. The things on your show. Bookend. Thank you. I'm falling asleep. For next week we're going to have our best bud Joe Murray on Pencil to Pencil. So if you're not familiar with Joe Murray is a comics mastermind. He is the owner of Captain Blue Hen Comics in lovely Newark, Delaware. Go Blue Hens. And also the new president of Comics Pro. And Comics Pro is the organization of retailers, comics retailers. And they have a really great summit a couple of times during the year where they get together and try to figure out how to make all this stuff work. So
was it just 2 weeks ago? They just had it?
Yeah, they just had it. Yeah. And President Joe Murray was up there holding court. So if you want to ask somebody a great question about this, Joe would be that guy. So please join us next week. Same bat time, same bat channel, Wednesday, 8 p.m. EST, right here on the Tubes of You or the Book of Faces. So, guys, this was great. Let's get out of here. I had a great time. Thank you guys for hanging out with us tonight. For Mike and Steve, I'm JN. and you were soaking in it. Thank you guys so much. And I'd be remiss if we didn't leave before washing those curves. Yeah, nice.
Oh, Mike nailed it.
Yeah, you look at that with a twist.
Yeah, that's good.
Show off.
Human Torch right there. That's
you
Come on.
All right, guys. Thanks. We'll see you in the funny pages.